Hello and welcome to the B&H Virtual Event Space. Today we've got Autumn Schrock back live on camera to talk about everything that goes into executing a successful photo trip to the backcountry. Welcome, Autumn.
Thank you.
Well, we've seen some of the images you've taken. We've seen you pack your bag. We're going to connect with you again very soon to take a look at your editing process for landscape photos. But being a super technical thinker slash OCD planner, I'm super curious what the everything else aspect of the photo trip will be. Uh,
Yeah.
all right. So everybody, be sure to leave your questions in the chat. We'll get to them at the end. And with that, Autumn, take it away.
Thank you so much. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's chat backpacking for photographers. On the surface, backpacking seems kind of awful. Like it's incredibly hard work. It's often cold, uncomfortable. It rains on you. The food is often more for fuel than enjoyment. There are so many bugs and bears are a thing. But with all that being said, there's just something about it that keeps us going out again and again into the backcountry with our belongings strapped to our backs. And while it can sound grueling, backpacking is actually so wonderful. It's brought me so many memories and photos that I will fondly look back on for the rest of my life. And I encourage every landscape photographer out there to give it a try. So here are my top 5 reasons why. I'll go in, we'll share my screen here. Number 1, you get to experience truly unique landscapes. It's human nature to want to conserve our energy and not want to backpack. But by going against our very nature and doing this, we are rewarded with some of the most stunning landscapes that a lot of people don't get to experience. I've seen significantly more jaw-dropping sights while walking down a trail or hiking up a mountain than behind the wheel of my car. So if you want to capture more unique landscapes, backpacking is easily one of the best ways to do it. Number 2, unique landscapes means more original compositions, right? So your inspiration and creativity get to really run wild while you're literally out there running wild. So while backpacking, you're not looking at like tunnel view in Yosemite National Park, a composition that's been shot a million times. You get to explore and find new compositions, which is like immensely refreshing. It's happened to all of us, whether we realize it or not, while researching a location, that we want to visit. We see a really epic photo of the spot, and then this amazing photo kind of just becomes ingrained in our brains, and we're almost unable to seek out any other composition because we just want that beautiful shot that we saw. Like when was the last time that you saw a unique photo of like Horseshoe Bend or Mesa Arch? There's kind of become an accepted standard for what like certain shots should look like. And that goes for many other spots in a bunch of national parks as well. And that's partly because they are designed that way. Like there are viewpoints that are literally have a sign that says take photos here, so that's a different part of it. But when thousands of photographers descend on the exact same location with the intention of creating the exact same composition as everyone else, the creativity of landscape photography as a whole suffers because of it. So when you photograph a location that's new to you, like new to your eyes, you can approach it more organically without that outside influence. And while many locations that are accessible by car have become kind of overrun by photographers, many locations like this are still out of reach for your average person. So number 3, like I said, backpacking is hard work, and you get a real sense of accomplishment from taking photos while backpacking. It feels like you actually earn your photos, and you end up having these images that immediately become more meaningful and sentimental to you because of that. Like I think it's similar to capturing those like pink sunrise and sunset colors. They're special to us because they're fleeting. They occur infrequently. I think if that was our normal, like our blue skies now, I think we would take that for granted. So I think the same thing applies with taking photos as well. When we can too easily take photos, I think it's really easy for us to take them for granted. And so when we put in the effort to get to these more remote, unique landscapes, the photos become more special all around. Number 4, probably my favorite reason, is that you get to say goodbye to the hustle and bustle of your incredibly busy daily life to fully immerse yourself in nature. Like, it's no secret that nature is healing, that we're meant to spend more time in it than we do currently for the most part. And as landscape photographers, it's quite necessary to hold a deep respect and adoration of nature. One of the many, many beautiful things about backpacking and spending extended time in the backcountry is that it forces us to get away from our modern society's distractions. We get to focus on nature without a rigorous schedule or without like unread emails gnawing at the back of your brain or without going over your long to-do list. Like, we are constantly overstimulated by all of these things going on in our lives. And I think all humans, but especially landscape photographers, should really seek this break from society. And the best way to do it, in my opinion, is at least spending a full day in the wilderness. While it's important to start out small as a beginner, like with single overnight trips, working your way up to several nights in the backcountry will allow you to fully reap those benefits. I recommend at least 2 to 3 nights, once you're comfortable with some single overnights if you're just getting started, so that you actually get like a full 24 hours spent in the backcountry. For me, I find that it's usually around the morning of like day 3 when I feel like I can fully like take a deep breath and it feels like, oh, I finally don't have to worry about my everyday life. Like, my brain's been disconnected enough for long enough, and it's had time to settle down. I can feel like I'm here, I'm present, and I'm fully free of all of those distractions. And you also get to slow down and pick up on the more subtle details of nature and our little friends that we often miss on day hikes or when we're rushing around trying to shoot sunset at a spot that we drove to. You get to be curious and explore like the little things that you used to pay attention to as a kid. And because you have that extended time in nature, you get to slow down your shooting as well. This allows you to have more meaningful compositions because you're not, running around rushing trying to capture your photos. I think it's ironic that a lot of landscape photographers get high anxiety around having to be like at the right place at the right time for the exact right composition, um, to often capture what's like a very tranquil and peaceful scene. And we're all guilty of it at some point or another, myself included. But by having the time to slow down and to be more thoughtful, to immerse ourselves in nature, we're able to actually sit and ponder what it actually is that we want to tell through our photographs. Number 5, backpacking is great exercise and life experience. It's definitely a workout, which just means that the more you do it, the stronger you'll get, the further you'll be able to go for your next trip. And backpacking also helps you to understand who you are as an artist. The silence of being out in nature almost forces you to turn inward. Like, I've done some serious soul searching while backpacking, and I've discovered some pretty profound things about myself and about what I want to share with the world through my photographs. And let's be honest, it's difficult to express ourselves, both in general and through our art. Putting yourself out there means that you're vulnerable, and that feels uncomfortable for a lot of people. We also are really, really, really good at ignoring our inner voice and our inner selves. So if you want to express and experience your full potential as an artist, it is necessary to take that time, do a deep dive about the purpose of your life and your place in the world, and exactly what you want to convey through your photography. And being out in nature just makes that so much easier. And I think that reason alone should be enough to convince every landscape photographer that a backpacking trip is indeed worth the effort. All right, let's take a look at how a typical backpacking trip differs from a photography-focused backpacking trip. So on a typical backpacking trip, you're hiking, covering a lot of ground each day, and you're making few stops. Whereas on a photography-based backpacking trip, you're covering, whoops, shorter distances, and you're making frequent stops throughout the day. For pace of a typical backpacking trip, it's often quick. You kind of just want to get through, get to camp, set everything up so then you can have some time to relax. Whereas on a photography trip, your pace is often slow, partly because your bag is usually heavier, but also because you're taking those stops for photos. And then on a typical trip, you're often eating during golden hour, like earlier in the morning and then, in the evening. But for a photo trip, you're usually eating breakfast after sunrise and either before like super early dinner or later after you're shooting sunset. Of course, this depends on the time in the year, of course, where you're going. So before you ask your non-photographer friends to join you on a trip, make sure that everyone is aware of the expectations that it is a photography-based trip, because not everyone is interested in making frequent stops or being woken up in the middle of the night to shoot the Milky Way. But I think everyone should want to do that, but I'm definitely a little bit biased. Okay, planning. So you'll first need to decide on a few trip parameters that will help you narrow down your trip options as you're figuring out like where you want to go. So first, group size. Are you going alone or are you going with friends? There are some trails that can't accommodate larger groups, like for tent spots. So I usually don't backpack in a group larger than like 4 or 5 people, depending, of course. But more often than not, I'm actually just backpacking with my partner Nate, and so with just the two of us, that's not really a huge thing to consider. But definitely think about group size. Time. So how much time do you have, or if you have a lot of time, how much time do you want to spend in the backcountry? This will also help you to narrow down trails based on time and distance. Type of trip. So what kind of backpacking trip do you want to do? I think most people think that backpacking is just hiking somewhere, but there are actually a bunch of different types of trips you can do. Of course, we've got our overnight hiking trip, which is a great place for beginners to start. Or if you're kind of just have a little bit of time, maybe it's like you have a day off or you want to take a Friday off and go for the weekend or something. It's just an overnight trip. But a multi-day hiking trip, I consider this pretty much anything longer than like a single overnight, but usually it's like 3 to 5 days on average. Multi-day canoe trip. This is a really cool way to experience a location or landscape in a completely different way from a backpacking or typical like hiking backpacking trip. Um, Often you're having to do portages, which means that you're going from like lake to lake. This is in the Boundary Waters for those wondering, but you're having to carry your canoe and all of your gear with you as you go kind of in between lakes or rivers or wherever you're going. And so that adds a different element to the backpacking trip. For instance, you usually have one big portage bag that you can see I'm carrying here that has everything in it. And then I'm carrying the 2 paddles. And I also have my camera gear strapped to the front of me. And then my partner Nate is carrying the canoe here and then his camera gear. So this is the dorkiest I think I've ever looked, but you can see I've got the big portage bag on my back, and then I have my camera gear in the front in a dry bag and head net because the mosquitoes can be pretty brutal. But this was my first canoe packing trip, and I have to say it was absolutely amazing. Granted, I'm a water baby. I love water very much, but I don't think I've had a more peaceful trip than this one. I think falling asleep to the quiet sound of water, like gently lapping the shore, would be um, enough to make anyone fall asleep and sleep like a baby. But I really highly recommend trying out a trip like this if you've never done it. It's definitely scarier as photographers with thousands of dollars of technical equipment with us, but Practice without gear if possible. Maybe you can borrow someone's canoe or you can rent a canoe, get comfortable in it first. Then make sure that you have a reliable dry bag for your gear and you should be good to go. Similar concept here for a multi-day paddleboarding trip. And of course, both of these could be an overnight water trip as well, but it's a little bit scarier, I think, for a lot of people to do a paddleboarding trip versus canoe because the risk of things getting wet is significantly higher. But there is something really, really cool about being able to like stand up and paddle through a place versus sitting. Sometimes being in a canoe for long periods of times hurts my back. Maybe I'm just getting old, but I do really love doing paddleboard trips also. Okay, so back to planning, thinking about distance. So taking your time into consideration, how many miles do you want or need to move each day? Remember that photo backpacking trips means you're going to be moving slower, of course. So I usually aim for around like 5 to 8 miles per day, depending on the difficulty of the trail and what all I'm having to shoot, of course. But this allows a good amount of time for stopping for photos throughout the day. But of course, your mileage may vary. You may be faster or slower than me. A location, take into account, how much time you have if you need to travel to your destination. Like, are you just staying local somewhere, or are you going to drive a few hours, or are you maybe going to fly to a different country? Time of year, what time of year do you plan to go? Like, this will help you figure out the trail conditions so you can plan accordingly. There are actually a lot of trails that by June they're still closed off from snow. If you're like somewhere with high elevation or somewhere going somewhere that's in the mountains, you have to be very careful that those trails are going to be accessible for you. So that's something to think about as well. Just because it's summer doesn't mean that it's summer in the mountains. So route and obstacles, once you have your trail chosen, take a look at the trail details. Like, are there tent pads or designated spots where you can set up a tent? Are there any outhouses, or do you need to bury or pack out waste? Do you need to carry all your water, or is there going to be water access for you? Is the trail an out and back or a through hike, meaning you're starting at one location and ending at another? Like, do you need to have someone to meet you and pick you up at a certain day and time? And then also see what obstacles you might have to prepare for. Like, how is the road leading up to the trailhead? Oftentimes, if you're going to be in the mountains, you might need a 4x4 vehicle or something that has high clearance. Are there large river or water crossings on the trail? Any like blockages that you might have to navigate, like downed trees or anything like that? Is there a lack of trail signage? Do you need to like have your map and compass out at all times? I mean, you can find all of this info on apps like All Trails. It's a really good app for getting all of this information. And then weather. Now that you know where you're going, what time of year, you can start to plan for the weather. Will there be summer conditions, or are you going in the shoulder season? Maybe it'll be chillier, or maybe it's full on winter. And that'll help you to figure out like how many clothing layers you need to bring, of course, what kind of sleeping bag and sleeping pad that you'll want to bring. Safety. It's not the most exciting part of backpacking or landscape photography, but it is a very important aspect, especially when we're backpacking, just because we are far away from medical help. I'm a wilderness first responder, so I feel like it's my duty to press that you consider safety as you adventure further and further into the backcountry to get those never before seen shots. I mentioned this story in my landscape photography class, but my partner Nate and I were backpacking in Tombstone Territorial Park in the Yukon when he severely sprained his ankle. We were, we were like several like double-digit miles from the trailhead, I believe. And I wrapped it up for him. We got it all taken care of, but he could barely walk on it. And we each had satellite communication devices with us, which is something that I never go into the wilderness without, and neither should you. I use the Garmin InReach Mini, and I usually just clip it to my backpack somewhere that's very easily accessible while I'm wearing it in case I fall or something. And then if I take my bag off, I'll like clip it to my pants or something. Nate was somehow able to hike to the next closest campsite. You can see him kind of grimacing with every step here. I don't know how he did it, but we traveled very, very slowly. And luckily for us, there was a ranger who was starting to prepare things for the end of the season. And he said that a helicopter was actually coming the next day to pick up some of those supplies. He was like, you should probably just take that. And we debated, Nate didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave. We definitely had some work for clients that we were still shooting. And so we're taking that into consideration, but there was a big storm coming and he really pressed that it would be smart for us to take the helicopter. So we ultimately did that. But Nate is an Eagle Scout. He has spent so many nights outside, so much time outside. I asked him if he could estimate like how many nights he thinks he's slept outside, and he said hundreds, if not close to 1,000. So you always think like, oh, it could never be me. I know what I'm doing. I won't get hurt. But like one little misstep on something, or you misjudge a rock, and you can hurt yourself. So I just want to stress how important it is that you take care of yourself, that you know how to take care of yourself in the outdoors as you embark on your photography backpacking adventures. And this is especially necessary if you plan to go alone, because you won't have anyone there to help you. But I recommend taking a wilderness first aid course, maybe even a wilderness first responder course if you want to get more into it, carrying a first aid kit, and then be sure to let someone know where you're going, when you're going, and when you expect to return, so that if for some reason you don't return by the time that you say you will, they can raise the alarm and they know where to search for you. And then go with experienced friends. They can not only be there for you if something happens and vice versa, but they can also help to lighten your load. With going with other people, you can share communal gear and food, and they can help you with, packing for the specific trip if you're not sure what all you're going to be needing. Wildlife. Okay, so this is not a great photo. This is the only camera and lens that I had with me. But Nate and I were backpacking in Gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska, which is the most remote national park in the US. And we were eating breakfast. So our tent, I think you can probably see my mouse. The tent was off camera over here, and then we were eating like off camera here. And Nate looked over my shoulder and he said, "Don't panic." And I was like, well, now I'm gonna panic. But I was like, what? And he said, "I think I see a bear." And I was very nervous because this was my first time experiencing a grizzly in this remote of a place. Because there's nothing for hundreds of miles. So it would have taken couple of days probably to get to medical help. But he was like, "Don't panic." So we slowly started to clean up our food. And then he was like, "Oh no." And I said, "What?" And he's like, "I think I see a cub." And that's when my heart really started pounding, because everyone knows mama bears are incredibly protective if they even like smell a whiff of a threat. So we hurried up, put everything in our bear can, stashed our bear can, and then we slowly kind of backed up this hill. It's kind of hard to tell, but this is a hill here. And then we had bear spray, of course, which is where I'm getting at here. But I'll zoom in here so you can see a little bit better. So this was mom here, and this was her cub. It was a yearling actually, so he's a little bit older, but he's got his head digging in for roots there. That's what they eat up there, is a lot of roots. But we made communication with her to let her know that we were there. And we said like, "Hey bear," and she like whipped her head around and stared at us. And I think time stopped for a millennia, and it was like the most scary thing. And we think that she probably has never seen a human before because of how remote this park is. And after a couple of seconds, I think, of trying to figure out what we were, she kind of panicked and she ran and started running the other direction. She was chuffing at her cub to follow, and he wasn't. So she kind of like nudged him and was like, "Come on, let's go." But all this is to say, even though this was a great encounter, nothing happened. It's incredibly important that if you're going to be somewhere with bears, black or brown, that you have bear spray or a gun in a case. Or like it's the Arctic, there were some rangers who they told us that it would probably be wise to have a gun as a backup option as well. So we did have a gun with us too, but bear spray is usually all that's recommended. But make sure that you're carrying bear spray with you. Okay, training. This is also kind of a safety aspect, because if you aren't in the condition to do the trail, you might put yourself in need of medical attention, or you might even need evacuation, which is not great for anyone. But also training and being physically prepared for your trip will make it significantly more enjoyable. Like if you're just completely gassed the whole time, you're not gonna have fun. I've done backpacks that were miserable, that I was unprepared for, and I give it a solid 0 out of 10 stars. Do not recommend at all. Of course, training by going on hikes is the best way to do it, but not everyone has quick and easy access to trails. So what Nate and I will do sometimes is just find a set of stairs. We'll load up the bag that we're going to be bringing, we'll wear the boots that we're going to plan on wearing, and just load it up with weight, and then go up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's not going to be fun at first. I thought I was going to throw up over here at one point. But as your body adjusts and get used to carrying the heavier weight, like you will be very, very thankful out on the trail that you trained beforehand. All right, gear. Let's chat some gear so with backpacking, it's all about weight. Since you have to carry everything on your back, your hips, unless you're canoe packing, then you don't have to carry it all the time, but you still do during those portages. But each item must carefully be chosen. Like you have to ask, what is this item? Why is this item needed? What is it for? Because you have to be very, very intentional with the gear that you bring. So first, let's start with backpacking gear. If you don't have the backpacking gear, you can borrow or rent it out to start. As you are like trying to purchase everything for your first backpacking trip, it can add up really quickly and be expensive. So it's great to see if you just have any friends that have gear that you can borrow. And this also gives you an opportunity to try out different gear before you buy, which is nice. And I'm pretty sure that places like REI will rent out gear as well if you don't have any friends that have gear. So that's an option too. Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing here so I can go over some gear. I'm not going to go through everything that I bring on a trip because we don't have that kind of time, but there are a few key pieces of gear that I wanted to talk about. So backpack. I don't recommend using a camera-specific backpack. They're often too heavy, being like just with nothing in it, they're really heavy, and they don't typically have enough proper support in the hip belt, which is something that you need. Whereas like backpacking bags are designed for carrying heavy loads, so they often have much more back support, and this is like such a hugely padded hip belt. And camera gear or camera bags are also designed to carry heavy weight, but over a much shorter distance. Backpacking bags are definitely made for carrying those heavy loads over shorter distances. And if you're wanting to be more of an ultralight backpacker, which is like a whole different subset of backpacker, but you could use a bag like this is from ULA Equipment. And so it's much less structured than a typical backpacking bag, but it still has pretty good support in the hip belt and the back panel. But this only weighs 2 pounds empty, where I think most camera bags probably are in the like 5 to 6, maybe 7 pounds empty, depending on the bag, of course. So that's something to think about as well. Sleeping pads and their R values. So thinking about temperature on your trip, they measure the warmth of sleeping pads by something that's called the R value. And that's basically just like how warm is the bag. I recommend using at least like an R3, R4 for like 3-season. And this does depend on how warm your body runs. I usually run pretty cold, but I am a warm sleeper, which is ironic and funny. But I still usually use a warmer bag just because it's kind of a misconception. People think that the sleeping bag matters more than the pad, but often the pad is what is losing warmth through the ground. So the pad is definitely the thing that you really want to think about. So I would recommend like a 3 or 4 at least on the R value scale for 3-season. Also, if you're going to be using an inflatable, make sure that you have a good repair kit in it. That is definitely something to keep in mind. And then for sleeping bags, the temperature ratings on sleeping bags are usually meant for a survival rating and not comfort rating. So if I'm going on a trip that is going to be like in the 30s overnight, I'll be bringing a 15-degree sleeping bag. This is Fahrenheit, by the way. So if it's going to be the 30s in the night, you don't really want to bring a 30-degree bag just because that temperature rating is meant to keep you alive, not to keep you comfortable. So I always err on the side of caution, going a little bit warmer on the bag than it says, just for that comfort rating. Because you can always unzip your bag and open it up if you're a little bit warm, but adding on more layers is often limited when you're backpacking. So it's better to be a little bit warm. And then compression sacks. I use these for everything. A good compression sack that is waterproof, I think, is a really good idea. Even if you have a water or a rain cover for your backpack, sometimes it can slip off a little bit and you don't notice it. Water can maybe get into your bag. So I definitely recommend keeping things like your sleeping bag. This is a 15-degree sleeping bag in here. It packs down pretty small in a compression sack, but these are also waterproof. And so this will keep it from getting wet in my bag, or if for some reason my bag's full and I need to like strap it to the outside or something. But compression sacks, I use them for everything that can be compressed. So any clothing that I'm bringing that I'm not wearing, like that includes down jackets, rain shells, everything, it's going in a compression sack just to make my bag and everything smaller. Water bladder, that can be a little bit of a scary thing to have in your bag with camera gear. But I have found if you invest in a good quality water bladder and you try it out beforehand, and then make sure that you're not putting any like sharper objects and not putting any pressure on this in your bag, then you should be good. But I definitely recommend trying out your water bladder first with an empty bag before you put all of your camera stuff in it, just to make sure that it doesn't leak. But these are so handy for just having the tube on your shoulder, take a drink whenever you want. You don't have to worry about putting your bag down and trying to get things out of it, which is just kind of a nightmare when you have like a 50-pound bag. Taking it on and off is like it's a thing. My Z seat, which I just knocked over trying to get that water bladder. So let me grab it here. This is a little creature comfort that I like to bring with me. It weighs like 1 ounce, and it's great for just if you're wanting to sit down to eat some lunch, but also for if you're like shooting a time lapse, or maybe you're out shooting astro and you have some time to kill. Like this is a great little thing to sit down to give you some comfort, and it's also insulated, so it keeps you a little bit warm if it's chilly outside too, which is nice. Hiking poles are really important for backpacking. I used to think they were like the dorkiest thing ever, but as I've gotten older and more backpack trips under my belt, I can see why these are so important. They really help to distribute your weight a little bit better so that not everything is just like on your knees and on your ankles and your hips. This helps to give a little bit more distribution, which is nice. And then not only, so I mentioned bear spray before, but not having bear spray in your bag, you want to make sure that you have some sort of like holster for your bear spray so that if you're hiking and you happen to turn a corner and you run into a bear, you're not going to be like having to put your bag down to get your bear spray out. You want it to be accessible, like very accessible at all times. So I usually just get like this is a cheap little holster that you can attach to like your hip belt, just so that it's always there and it's always accessible. It just makes it kind of easier to carry too, because it's got this little like safety feature, so you don't have to worry about usually there's a safety feature on the bear spray anyway, but I've borrowed some from friends who didn't have that. So this is also nice to have that safety feature to help to prevent you from accidentally setting it off. Okay, camera gear. Fun stuff now. Okay, so camera body. I usually only bring one camera body with me unless for some reason it's like for a specific trip or for a specific reason that I need 2 bodies. Usually just bringing one. And usually I'm bringing just my regular camera bodies, either my Sony Alpha 1 or my Sony A7R5, depending on the trip. If I know that there's going to be wildlife around that I'm going to want to shoot, then I'll go for the A1. And if I know I'm going somewhere where there's not really going to be any wildlife, I don't have to worry about the speed of the A1, then I'll go with the R5 so that I get a little bit more resolution. But for backpacking specifically, the A7CR is really fantastic. If you haven't used that, it's basically the A7R5, but in a very small, compact body. And I got to use it in Tombstone for our backpacking trip where Nate hurt himself. And it was really, really great to have that smaller, lightweight body. And I meant to buy one when I got back, and I literally just like completely forgot, and I haven't gotten one. So I need to buy one, but I do recommend the A7CR for backpacking. Or the A7C2 is great too, but I love that the A7CR has that has higher megapixels. And then for lenses, I'm usually bringing one wide lens, one medium, and then a telephoto. I'm not usually a very wide shooter, so I'll bring a wide lens that has a purpose, dual purpose, that's the word. So I'll bring my Sony 14mm f1.8 G Master for wide landscapes, but then also if I want to do any astro, this is great for that. So I usually just bring this, and then my go-to for backpacking is usually my Sony 24 to 70mm f2.8 G Master Mark II. The Mark II is smaller and lighter, so that definitely makes more sense for backpacking, which I really like. And then I definitely want a telephoto. I'm usually more of a tighter shooter anyway, so I'm often lugging around my Sony 100 to 400mm G Master, which it's kind of a beast. But if I have a really heavy bag already, like say I'm doing like a 7-day trip and I have to carry a lot of stuff, a lot of food, then I might consider bringing the much smaller, the 70 to 200mm f4 macro lens. Also, the macro use case on it is pretty cool for getting some up close shots, like maybe the little frog that I showed, or the like the caterpillar was used with this lens. So, you know, if you look at them side by side, it is quite a bit smaller, but you do lose 200mm of focal range. So kind of just, you got to weigh your pros and cons, how heavy you want your bag to be, but there is definitely a difference. And I hope that Sony comes out with the updated 100 to 400 soon, because that would be cool for backpacking. um, into tripod. It's really tempting when you're backpacking to skimp on a tripod and just bring like a really small one, because you're like, oh, probably not going to need it, and it's fine. I want it to be light as possible. But I have done that. I have brought those little tiny tripods, and they're pretty much useless, because when you're backpacking, unless you're like, you can find the perfect rock or like the perfect trail, when you set it down in the grass or in any sort of like field or any sort of ground that's soft, like it kind of just sinks and it's down low. So I would recommend still bringing a normal tripod, get one that's a little bit lighter, but not like one of those little tiny guys. So this is the Gitzo GT1545T with the Colorado Tripod Company ball head, the Aspen ball head. And this is such a great combo for backpacking, because this is a carbon fiber tripod, so it's really lightweight and small, but it does actually have a ton of stability with it for its size, which is fantastic. And I've talked a lot about the Aspen ball head. It's the best. It has so much mobility, so highly recommend both of those for backpacking. And then for accessories for camera gear, I usually will just put stuff in like a little roll top sack like this, so that everything is together and I don't have to worry about like finding all these little pieces in my backpack. So it's easy just to put them in this little bag, but I'm usually bringing a circular polarizing filter and a neutral density filter. These are both from Breakthrough Photography. I really love those, and I'll usually just bring them in these little plastic cases because they're really protective, which is important, and they're small and lightweight. And sometimes I'll even, if I'm trying to really skimp on weight, I will take my polarizer out of the case and just put it on my 24 to 70, and then it's just there for the whole trip. And if I need to switch it out, I can switch it out with this one and just have the one case. But often I'm just bringing two, because this weighs like pretty much nothing. Then I'll always bring step-up ring or two, depending on which lenses I'm bringing, so that I can share those filters across my different lenses if they have different front thread filters. Filter threads, that's the way to say that. A small microfiber cloth or a lens wrap, and I'll talk a little bit more about the lens wraps later on when we get into actually packing the gear, but to show you, I'll either bring like a little lens cloth like this that packs away, or instead of that, if I'm packing my bag in a specific way, I might just use one of these like Sony lens wraps where you can just put the lens in this little pocket and it protects it a good amount. And then you also just have like a really nice big microfiber cloth. There are also some dedicated lens wraps like this one here where it's got a little bit more protection than the microfiber, but it's like neoprene on the inside, and then this kind of like not velcro-y, kind of velcro-y texture on the outside, the soft velcro. And so it's not the best in terms of you can't really use it as a lens cloth either, but it is more protective if you're worried about that. A little dust blower. If I'm going somewhere that I know is going to be a bit sandy and that I'm probably going to get some sensor spots if I am changing lenses, then I'll bring a little air blower guy. These are pretty lightweight and small. And then in terms of batteries, I will bring one in my camera that's fully charged, of course. And then I will also I usually just bring one spare, of course, depending on the trip and how long it is. But the reason I do that is because I will also usually bring a little, like a 10,000 milliamp battery pack as well, with a cable, of course. I have actually gone on a backpacking trip and I forgot the cable, so don't do that. Make sure that you have like a little bag or something that you can put the cable into. But not only can you charge your camera with this, and the 10,000 milliamp is like the equivalent of around 4 of the NP FZ100 Sony batteries, so that gives you like 6 batteries. That's a lot. If you're going to be doing time lapses or if you're out for like a whole week, then that's probably going to be plenty. But not only can you charge your camera with this, but you can charge like your phone or your InReach, your Garmin, your satellite device, other things like that, which is pretty handy. Then I will also bring, for memory cards, I will bring 2 in my camera slots, of course, and then I usually also will just pack a few extras in like a little or like a little pill bag. And I use the Sony Tough cards, so I don't have to worry about them like being in a protective case because they can take a pretty good beating. Not that I give them a beating, but I don't have to have them in like a hard shell case just because I know that they're going to be able to stand up to being in my bag and kind of floating around. And so just using like a clear plastic little pill bag is really nice, a handy way to keep some extra memory cards. The Peak Design capture clip, I definitely recommend this for all landscape photographers in general, but this is especially true if you're backpacking, just because it is so much more difficult to put your heavy bag down, get your camera out, and then to put it back on. So by having this little capture clip that you can clip onto your backpacking strap, your camera then can just slide right into it with this little capture clip base plate. It just slides right in, and then you have your camera at the ready kind of at all times, which is super handy. And then just the Peak Design system in general, by having this base plate on here, it's Arca Swiss compatible, so it fits into my tripod head, fits into this, and then also it allows me to clip my camera strap to the bottom of my camera so that whenever it's hanging, the lens is pointing down instead of out, so I don't have to worry about bumping it on anything. So I really love the capture clip and the Peak Design system. Then with that, I will also pack just a little Allen key in case the base plate comes a little bit loose. There's kind of nothing really, unless I'm bringing like a multi-tool with me, which sometimes I am, but I'm usually just bringing a knife. So this is a nice little addition too. Then camera strap, I kind of already touched on that. I'll bring a strap with me. I just have the Peak Design, I think this is the Slide Light, so it's a little bit lighter of a strap, but it's also just like, it feels good and it doesn't like dig into your shoulder if you have a heavier lens on, like your 100 to 400, like you get with like some of the really thin straps. And then camera rain cover. Very, very important to have a camera rain cover. Because I'm trying to save weight, I usually will just use these like cheaper plastic Optec USA plastic bags, and they're pretty nice. Make sure that you're checking it, that there aren't a bunch of holes in it, of course, before you go. All right, and so that's all the camera gear and the backpacking gear. So let's hop back into the presentation. Okay. And so here's a packing list, just an example packing list that I have listed out here for you. I'm not going to go over everything, but I wanted to give you an example packing list if you want to maybe screenshot it right now, if you want to reference it later. This is what I'll usually take on like a standard, maybe like a 3 to 5 day overnight or multi-day trip. Okay, now on to how to properly pack the gear. Sounds kind of silly, but there is a best practice for actually how to pack your backpacking bag. First, you want to pack your full water bladder in this little water bladder pocket first. It's too difficult to do this once you already have things in your bag because they expand quite a bit, your bladders, and so it's really hard to get it in your bag when you have a bunch of other stuff. So put that in your bag first. Then we start at the bottom and work our way up. So the bottom of the bag, this is where you have bulky gear and items that you're not going to be using until you get to camp. So this is like your sleeping bag, your sleeping pad, your camp clothes, warmest layers for nighttime. And then the core of the bag is for your heaviest, densest items that you're not going to need access to while you're hiking. And I have a little asterisk next to heaviest because this is what's recommended for traditional backpacking, but for photographers, it's a little bit different oftentimes, of course, depending on the length of the trip and how much food you're bringing, but often your camera gear is the heaviest thing that's going to be in your bag. But things like your bear can with food, your water bladder, and like your stove, things like that should go in the core of your bag. If you pack your heavy items in the bottom of your bag, like the heaviest, it's going to make your bag sag. And if you put them at the very top of your bag, then it's going to make you a little bit tipsy. So it's usually recommended for all your heavier things to be in the core. Next, the top of your bag, this is like bulkier trail essentials that you can access really quickly. Things like your rain jacket, rain pants in case a storm moves in really quickly, or like a warm fleece layer, your first aid kit, your water filter, any bathroom supplies, and then of course your camera gear. So having your camera gear at the top does make your bag a little bit more tipsy, but if you keep your camera and a lens out on your capture clip, then just having like a couple of lenses and these accessories in the top of your bag, it doesn't make it too tipsy. Now, I do want to talk about the packing the camera gear. I don't use the like backpacking or the camera backpack internal core units when I'm doing backpacking trips. A lot of times people will say like, oh, just take a small core unit and put your camera in that or whatever. But I find that they are often too bulky and they have unnecessary weight, and I don't actually need all of that protection because I have a lot of things that are protective in my bag that I can use already. So I'll wrap gear in and if I'm not going to use a lens wrap like I showed earlier, I will just wrap things like in a beanie or in like a down coat or in something that I'm not going to need on that trail. Of course, if it is a colder trip where I am going to be wearing like a down coat or my beanie while I'm hiking, then I will bring like a lens wrap. But I find that it's easier just to use like a little lens wrap or a beanie or something to pack my camera gear than using like a whole bulky ICU. Accessory pockets. These are like small items that can be organized and that you can access quickly. So navigation things like your map and your compass or your GPS, sunglasses, sunscreen, chapstick, headlamp, trail snacks, if you have a water bottle, if you don't have a bladder. And then your backpack rain cover. Usually your backpack rain cover, if you're using like a dedicated backpacking bag, they have one that's like built a dedicated pocket and built in the bottom of your bag. But if your bag doesn't have that, not all of them do, make sure that you have your camera or your backpacking bag cover quickly accessible. And then there are often like little fasteners and loops on the outside of your bag for attaching things like hiking poles or a foam sleeping bag or sleeping pad and your tripod, things like that. I don't usually put too many items on the outside just because it makes it easier for your bag to get caught on things, which is a safety hazard. Plus, it can make it difficult to get things out of your bag if those loops and fasteners are like covering zippers, things like that. Okay, weight. Your bag is gonna be heavy. There's no way around that. With camera gear, my bag is anywhere between like 35 and 50 pounds. Usually I'm closer to like the 40, 45 pounds for like a multi-day trip. Um, the rule of thumb is that your bag shouldn't weigh more than 20% of your body weight. And that usually works well for most people. For me, I weigh between like 105 and 110 pounds. So it's pretty much impossible for me to have a backpacking bag that is 20 pounds or less. I've just come to accept that fact. But this is where sharing items with other people in your group can come in handy. And often Nate will take an extra item so that our bags are a little bit more evenly distributed based on our weights and what we're carrying. All right. I'm also going to be, if you're going to do water-based trips, I do use ICUs for this scenario. This is because you're going to be wanting to get quick access to your gear. And if you have it like all wrapped up in lens wraps or in like a roll top bag inside of a bag, it like takes a lot of time to get your stuff out. But when you're in a canoe or you're on a paddleboard, you want to like in and out quickly. You don't want to have to risk anything getting wet. So on the left photo, where I'm the dorkiest I've ever looked, I'm wearing a backpack style dry bag. And I have found that instead of this type of dry bag, using the right side, which is a duffel style bag, is significantly easier. Whenever you're trying to like slide an ICU in and out of a top loading backpack, it makes it much more difficult than just like opening up a duffel style dry bag. So I recommend a duffel bag if you're going to be doing any sort of water trips. All right, so some considerations. These are things that I haven't gone over yet, but that you should consider, like learn from my mistakes. Um, Bring more memory cards than you think you'll need. Memory cards weigh almost nothing, and it's devastating to run out of memory like halfway through a trip. If you're just starting out with backpacking, choose a trail that is more accessible for you and that will give you the best bang for your buck in terms of photo compositions. Like this is the place where I went for my first backpack. My first overnight was at this spot. And it has 360-degree views all around. There are so many different compositions that you can get. It's only 3.4 miles round trip, I think, and like 1,300 feet of elevation gain. So it's much more accessible than doing like, a 3-day hike that maybe has like 1 or 2 good photo spots. Love that place. Such a good backpack. Okay, altitude and its effects. So consider both the starting altitude and the peak altitude for the trail that you're doing so that you know if you need to train at a higher altitude or not. This one is kind of tricky because some people are just genetically better with altitude than others, and there's not really anything that you can do about that. Like, for example, altitude doesn't really affect me a ton. Specifically, it doesn't affect my breathing a ton. Like, I don't get super winded like a lot of people do, which is the easiest like side effect of altitude to notice. But I found the hard way, that altitude affects me in ways that it doesn't affect other people as much. So this is a photo. Nate and I went backpacking in Peru. This was the highest point of the trail. I think it says like 16,355 feet or 4,985 meters. It was the highest altitude that I'd ever been at. And I felt pretty great. Like I felt pretty good. Maybe a little bit more winded than usual, but nothing compared to like what I was expecting. So I think, I got a little bit confident and we got to camp for night, made some dinner. I nibbled a little bit, but I just wasn't super hungry. So we went to bed. Also, altitude affects your sleep, so I didn't sleep great. We woke up for sunrise to hike to Rainbow Mountain. And I felt okay. We started hiking and probably like 15 to 20 minutes in, I got really, really nauseous. And I had to pass off my backpack to our guide Guido here because I just could not hike with that extra weight for some reason. And then I got extremely cold. Like I thought hiking would help, to work up my body heat. So I was trying to truck along and I just could not stop shivering. Then we finally made it up to Rainbow Mountain, and Nate had to pass off his 6,000-meter mountaineering jacket to me because I still could not stop shivering. It was maybe only like 25 degrees. You can see that there's, frost on the ground, but I was wearing a jacket meant for like 20 to 25,000 feet elevation temperatures. And I don't know if you can see it super well here, but I'm not wearing lipstick or anything on my lips here. That's just how cold and how purple they were. I could not feel my hands or my toes. I barely took any photos at Rainbow Mountain, which bums me out. I thought that maybe I was like getting sick or I was just like really cold, just having a cold morning because there was frost on the ground. But finally on the hike back, I had to sit down. I could not hike anymore. And then Nate asked me if had eaten anything. And then it was like a light bulb. It dawned on me. I didn't even think that food could be the issue. My body was struggling so hard due to lack of food and exercise at such a high altitude. And then on top of the cold temperatures. So something that altitude also does is it can take away your appetite. And I didn't know that going into this trip. So here's a little video clip that Nate took of me after he gave me a protein bar. This was when I sat down. I laid down actually because I couldn't even sit up. There are tons of stray dogs in Peru, and this little fellow he was trying to eat my food.
Hey, he's been eating us. He's like, listen, I'll get more aggressive if I have to.
I'm sorry, I need this. I know you need it too.
I feel like you can just see how exhausted I was that I couldn't even like sit up. And I'm the type of person who misses meals and doesn't really realize it. And forcing myself to eat is something that I'm really terrible at. So I probably should have forced myself to eat more dinner that night or the night before. But now I always bring snacks that I can eat at almost any time. Like even if you're not in the mood to eat, you should bring something that you can force down. So I really love like little energy gels and energy little gummies because they're really easy to get down. They're usually like fruity and they taste pretty good. So I like the brand Goo, it's spelled GU. And so I can get some nutrition that way because your body needs fuel way more than you think you need. You exert a significant amount of calories when you're backpacking. So trails versus no trails. If the route that you're planning to do includes hiking in areas with no designated trails, consider that you're going to be much slower. When you can usually do maybe 7 miles on a trail, you might only be able to do 4 on the same trail or on the same area if there aren't any trails. So for example, in Gates of the Arctic, the only way, in is to hike or to fly in. There are no designated trails, no roads, nothing. And the landscape is littered with these little features called tussocks. They're like the little ball-shaped clumps of grass that you'll see me navigate here in a second. But they are very deceiving, which is what makes navigating them so tricky. Like they're hard like basketballs before they mature. And then after they mature, they basically become as soft as like a mushroom top. And so you never know if what you're going to step on is hard like a basketball or soft like a mushroom. And so it's very easy to roll your ankle here, and it just causes you to travel incredibly slowly. They look kind of like they're from Dr. Seuss, but they are not nearly as fun. Shooting and sleeping schedule. Figure out when you're going to have time to sleep and what your shooting schedule will be ahead of time. Photography trips can be exhausting, depending on the time of year and when, how long the daylight hours are. So it's important to think about scheduling in time for when you're going to sleep. Like this photo was taken at 1:19 a.m. in June. So this is midnight sun. It never really dipped like too far below the horizon. And so it meant that those beautiful golden hour times was typically when we would be sleeping. So we tried to turn our sleep schedule more nocturnal, but it's really hard to do that, especially on the trail. So if you're going to be doing something like this, where you're in a place with midnight sun, or maybe you're going to stay up all night to photograph the aurora or something, I would recommend trying to flip your schedule a few days before your trip so that you're not exhausted on the actual backpack. Break in your boots before you go. Break them in ahead of time. You'll most likely get some sort of discomfort in your feet when you wear your boots the first few times as they break in. So go on some smaller day hikes, wear them around your house. Just make sure that they fit beforehand, because it's agonizing having blisters on a backpacking trip. Check your gear beforehand. It would be devastating to get to your camp spot for the night and realize that your sleeping pad has a hole in it, or that your tent has a huge hole in it, or some of your poles are broken or something. That happened to us when we were hiking. We backpacked to Havasu Falls and we had just adopted kittens. And now we know kittens love the sound, like kind of creakily sound of like an inflatable sleeping pad. And we used all the tape that we had. There's some on the other side as well. We never quite got it to hold air for longer than like half an hour. So definitely make sure that you're checking your gear before you go. Also on one of my paddleboard trips, my touring board, I was inflating it near the shore and it exploded. which was something that I had never dealt with before. And for some reason, while I was packing for this trip, I had this like weird intuition, this like gut feeling that something was gonna go wrong. And maybe it's because I hadn't used my touring board in a while. And so I just felt like something's gonna happen. And so I packed my backup board, which is here. This is my yoga board. And you can see that there are no like gear tie down straps like an average touring board or even just an all-around board has. So I had to make this like abomination strap system in order to be able to carry all of my gear on my paddleboard. So being prepared with backups if necessary can be helpful too. And listen to your gut, which ties into the last one here, be adaptable. At least one thing is probably not going to go according to plan, and that's just life in general, right? You know, it can feel a little bit scarier when you're out in the wilderness because, you know, you are a little bit more vulnerable in the elements. But one thing is almost certain, if you're in the mountains, it's probably going to rain on you at some point or another. Accept it. Don't forget your rain gear and maybe try to have fun with it. It might even hail on you and you get bruises all over your legs, like that happened to us in Montana, but it was actually kind of fun. Like storms, I feel like when you're backpacking can actually be kind of fun. And then photographically speaking, you know, you might get completely overcast skies or rainy conditions for the entire trip, even when the weather predictions, you know, said otherwise. That's happened to probably every landscape photographer who's gone out to shoot like a sunset. You know, you get skunked sometimes. Not every trip's going to produce bangers, but I think it's important to try to keep a good headspace when you're shooting, because you are there and you are at the whim of nature. You know, nature is unpredictable and it can be relentless. It can be unforgiving and it can be dangerous, but it's also so incredible and beautiful and inspiring. And I mean, it's easily the best thing about our planet, in my opinion. And with that being said, it's also our responsibility as landscape photographers to make sure that we are minimizing our impact on the environment as we're backpacking. So I know we're running low on time, but quickly I'm just going to go through the 7 leave no trace principles. They're really important to learn as you are backpacking. They're mostly common sense, but they were developed to ensure a sustainable future for the outdoors so that everyone can enjoy, you know, recreating in them and exploring for many, many years to come. And if you're like me and you forget new information like way too easily, way too quickly, you can use these hand signs to remember the 7 principles. I was taught them in my Leave No Trace trainer program, and it actually made them like stick in my head. So, okay. So number 1, hopefully you can see this. Let me pull up my little diagram here. Okay. So number 1, hopefully that's not covering too much, is be prepared and plan ahead. So it's like you're reading a book, being prepared, coming with a backup plan. Number 2, travel and camp on durable surfaces. So make sure that you're trying to stay on things that aren't like a precious flora. Number 3, dispose of waste properly. So it's kind of like a little scoop, a little shovel. Number 4, leave what you find. So take photos, leave things there for other people to enjoy. Number 5, minimize campfire impacts. There's enough wildfire smoke out here as it is, so make sure we're minimizing that. Number 6 is respect wildlife, which I think is so cute. Make sure that we're giving them their space, that we're respecting them. And then number 7 is be considerate to other visitors. So don't go blasting your tunes. You know, make sure that you're being respectful and considerate to other people. Okay, so some final thoughts here. You know, backpacking isn't for everyone, and that's okay. It doesn't make you a bad photographer by any means if you decide that backpacking is not for you. It's not easy. Like, I've cried while backpacking. I know that it's not easy, but there really is something so special about immersing yourself in our planet's stunning nature. You know, I feel the most alive and the most present when I'm out there. And I feel like I create some of my best work because I'm kind of stripped down from all of, you know, like those distractions that we talked about. Like instead of being lawyers or chefs or like photographers out there, we're just humans. We get to live like a more simple life. And so not only is backpacking a fantastic way to take landscape and adventure photos, but it's just an incredible experience all around. So, you know, I hope that you'll at least give it a try. You know, you might have a life-changing experience. You never know until you try it. I really hope that there are some people watching who have never backpacked before. Hopefully I didn't scare you off with any of this, but I hope that this inspires you to try it. You know, I feel like if you do, before you know it, you're going to be saying, I want to see mountains again. Mountains, Gandalf. Gosh, I'm such a dork. Backpacking and photography, though, they go hand in hand as they both offer, you know, an opportunity for adventure and self-discovery. You know, whether you're hiking through a staggering mountain or you're frolicking in a field of wildflowers or like some autumn foliage, like this photo here, backpacking allows you to get up close and personal with the world around you. And photography is just the perfect way to capture those special moments and preserve them for a lifetime. So, well, that about wraps it up for today. Again, my name is Autumn Schrock, and you can find me all around the internet on all the social medias as Pops or on my website, autumnschrock.com. My partner Nate, you know, who's also a landscape photographer, he took the background photo here of my presentation, so shout out to Nate. But we lead photography workshops all around the world and just feel so grateful that we get to do this for our jobs, to share our love and passion for photography. So if you'd like to join us on a trip, you can find all of the information. It's going to be the most fun you ever had, I promise. And you can head to inthewildworkshops.com. So shout out to Sony and B&H for having me back on the event space. It's so great to be here again. And thank you all for tuning in. I would be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.
This has been great. Having been a B&H salesperson at the store, my head's normally locked in at the shots inside the camera or the gear inside the bag. This is a great way to shine a light on thinking more about outside of all that, like literally just taking in the environment, considering the goal of the trip, especially learning from your mistakes.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have any idea of how much of the world that you have backpacked hiked so far? Like, how many of the parks have you really hit?
Oh my gosh, that is such a tough question to answer. A lot of them. Um,
Uh,
I have not done as much as Nate has, just being an Eagle Scout, you know, he has done so much outside. But
Gotcha.
gosh, if I had to estimate, I don't even know, maybe a 100? I don't
Wow.
know. It's hard to say. I'm not totally sure. I need to tally that up so that I know next time someone
Well,
asks me.
here's a good way for if it's 100. Are there any trips or new places you're super looking forward to? Because then if there is, right?
That's true, yes. We are going to Greenland this fall and we're going to be doing some backpacking there. And I am very, very excited because I've never been to Greenland and it just looks so stunning. I'm really excited to like actually get immersed in that environment instead of just doing like a cruise or a hike. You know, we're going to be on a sailboat like by
Oh,
ourselves,
cool.
just and then yeah, doing some backpacking when we hit shore too. So I'm really, really excited for that.
Nice. Um, so considering you've hit nearly 100 or 100, um, like starter trips for anyone that's, you know, considering going for their first time,
Mhm.
are there any parks or trails that you think make a great first step into the foray of like going out into more advanced?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the national parks all have like some pretty nice, either if you've never camped before and you just want to like have a little campground, a lot of the national parks have really great campgrounds, but then also a lot of them have like designated backpacking areas as well, which I think is a good way to start just because there's so much information on the National Park Service's website about those backpacks. So I think that that would be a good spot to look at your local national parks, but also just on all trails, like looking at just what's close to you. There are often going to be a few little hikes here and there that you can camp at. And I feel like that's a good way to start too.
Cool. So as let's say not a photography trip, when it's a pure hiking trip, you know, just for yourself. You are a photographer, so there, you know, there is that uh inkling that you need to bring something. So
Mhm.
when it's a pure hiking trip, what's the minimal amount of gear you'll bring? Like, is a phone good enough, or maybe do you go compact camera?
Mhm. I don't think I've ever backpacked without a camera that's not my phone.
Mhm.
I think I think it's because I am usually a tighter shooter, and so I like that telephoto compression, and the phones just aren't quite as good at that as an actual camera is. So I've never done that, and I feel like that's actually maybe that's not true. Maybe I have done that when I was first starting out. Maybe I've done a couple, but I feel like it's the phone. I'm so like I have this association of it being like my hectic busy life where I feel like I don't use my phone very much on those trips unless it's like documenting Nate walking while he's sprained his ankle or like something like
Mm.
that. You know, it's like
Oh,
those are nice for like little snapshots, but usually I feel like I try to disconnect from the phone and even though there's a camera on it, but that's just kind of my personal, I think, justification for that
yeah,
maybe.
gotcha. Yeah. Well, for all the people, we did link Autumn's packing for your next landscape trip in the chat. You know, so if along with everything she mentioned today, Danny was hard at work making sure that anyone that was interested in what you mentioned could find it. So if anybody wants a more detailed look gear wise, check that video out. Autumn, we're just about out of time. So much thank you for doing this.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me back on.
Also, thanks, just like you said, thanks to Sony for hosting this. And thanks to everyone for watching. If you'd like to see more from Autumn about landscape and astrophotography or any of our other speakers, please check out the B&H Event Space YouTube. With that, again, thanks all around. This has been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Have a great afternoon.